Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. G'day and welcome to Voice of Gord. On this episode of the show, I had the great pleasure of speaking with my good mate Gavin Smith from New Zealand. Old trucker I met up on the ice, and he's got quite a life story, and I got a fair bit of it out of him over the course of an hour and a half, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy this. It should be noted I recorded this show with Gavin before Christmas. And since then, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, has stepped down, so you might notice that we didn't discuss that. I want this show to get spread around in New Zealand as far and as wide as we can, because I think Gavin's one of the best that place has to offer, as you'll hear from the show. And although he tries to downplay it, Gavin's been of great service to his fellow military veterans down there. And he's just an awesome fella. Francie, if you're hearing this, good on ya. Your husband's a great guy. Anyway, without any further delay, I want to bring you guys Mr. Gavin Smith. Welcome back to another episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord. This is my voice. Today we have a very special guest, a very, very old friend of mine who I met up on the ice in the Northwest Territories, the record holder of the most loads hauled in a season up there, New Zealand Navy veteran, outback trucker, world traveler extraordinaire, and all-around interesting guy, all the way from Martin, New Zealand. Please welcome Mr. Gavin Smith. G'day, Gav.
G'day, Gord. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic, sir. It just snowed outside here. We just got about 3 inches of snow. What's the weather like in Martin today?
A very slight breeze and overcast, but it's supposed to be summer. So, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And obviously you're calling in from New Zealand. Can you describe for my listeners where exactly Martin is and what Martin is all about?
Right. It's a small rural town in the Rangitikei area, lower central North Island of New Zealand. So we're about 3-4 miles from the coast as the crow flies, and off the beaten track like the main road bypasses us. So, yeah, just a small rural town of about 3,500 people, and we live on the edge of that town.
If I recall correctly, in my I've been to New Zealand 3 times. Been a guest at your old house in Pairoa twice. I seem to recall that in all the times I've been to New Zealand, even driving truck there, even touring around with the old man and my own travels, the first time I went there, I never did go to Martin. Is it near Dannyverk or Palmerston North or something like that?
Yes, it's between Palmerston North and Wanganui.
Oh, other side. Dannyverk's over on the east.
Yes, correct.
Right,
yeah.
Right. I got confused. Pardon me.
No, that's all right.
If I recall correctly, you were born and maybe grew up a little east of Taupo. What's that countryside called over that way?
No, I was raised up out on the east coast, out from Dannyverk, actually.
Okay.
Grew up on a farm, hill country farm, no flats, all hills up one side and down the other. And left there in 1965 to join the New Zealand Navy. Yeah.
That's there's going to be a full circle part to that story, because even though you're retired from trucking, you're still working for your mates in the Navy in a way, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm actually the president of an outfit called the Murra Nuclear Veterans Group. In 1973, we were one of two ships that were sent to protest the French nuclear testing at a Pacific atoll called Murra. And supposedly they were going to look after us if anything befell us, but we've got, at a rough count, 63 grandchildren, 63 children and 61 grandchildren with unexplained medical issues that we believe relate to our service. So an ongoing battle, nearly 50 years, and we've still got nowhere with getting our children genetically tested and to try and ascertain that what we were exposed to has actually caused their illnesses.
So how long have you been serving with this particular veterans group now?
Oh, I started with them while I was still working, Gordon, probably 20 years.
Oh, wow. I didn't even realize it was that long.
Maybe a bit longer. I was involved with them when I came over with you at the end of the ice road season one year. So that's got to be 20 years ago at least. Yeah, so probably more, probably 25 years I've been involved with them.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think both of us, our last year on the ice was 2009. And then, yeah, I remember coming down to meet you in Lethbridge and picking you up from Ivor McGill's place. Odd that we had the same last name. And
that's right.
Yeah, you came all the way back to Ontario, and I took you to Niagara Falls and all the rest of it.
That's right. Yes.
That was a good trip.
Yes. It was. Yes. Country I'd never ever seen before.
Yeah, but I mean, you've seen so much of Western Canada, in your travels with RTL and WestCan and going to visit guys like Jerry McCully. You've seen more of Northern and Western Canada than most Canadians have.
Yes, quite possibly, Gordy. Yes. And I was very fortunate, actually, in that I got a lot of work up that way. So it was good.
Right. So draw us a line from New Zealand Navy. Like, how long were you in the Navy for? What was your position on the ship? Where did you tell us some stories about your Navy service before we go trucking?
Well, as I say, I joined in 1965 in the May. And so 3 months basic training and then specialized training. And I served as an engineering mechanic, looking after steam propulsion machinery. Each ship had 2 boilers and twin turbines to drive it. And so looking after operating the boilers, operating the machinery, and also the auxiliary machinery like diesels for generation when you weren't at full steam, air conditioning, double bottoms, all those kind of things. So, yeah, you progressed through, and I wound up as a leading engineering mechanic, and saw the writing on the wall that we weren't going very far with the government that we had. So my time came up and I got out. So that was 1976. So I did just a little over 11 years.
And how far afield did you get to travel while you were with the Navy?
Got to the States, Hawaii, a couple of times. Never got to the mainland states, mainly through the Far East, Southeast Asia, so Japan, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand, all those kind of places. We used to go on to what they called the Far East Strategic Reserve, but in that time, we were involved in supporting American aircraft carriers that were flying aircraft into Vietnam. So we did anti-submarine patrols around them and what they call plane guard. When they're actually flying the planes off, there's 3 ships circling around the carrier to pick up anyone that either miss coming in or have a miscalculation during takeoff. So, and we used to do 19 days at that and then go back to Singapore for 3. And our government's requirement was that you had to do 21 days operational service in a row. So they gave us 19 days and would send us back again. And then 3 days later, you'd be back for another 19 days. So our service was never actually recognised as warlike service. So, yeah, politicians playing games.
Yeah. Story old as time. So you did 11 years in the Navy. You get back, you get out of the Navy, and then what's next? Where do you head to?
I started out, I went back to milking dairy cows first, but soon realised that was never going to be my life's ambition. So I got a job operating a excavator on a catchment board job. Never operated one before, but fell into it pretty simply, and that led to operating dozers and general machinery used in farm contracting, and of course driving trucks to shift it around, and gradually drifted from operating machinery into driving full time. And then over a matter of years, I guess, as you got more experience, we went a bit further. And of course, you have to remember New Zealand is only a small country by world standards, or compared with the likes of the United States or Canada, it's only a tin pot. But as you know yourself, the terrain is so different. It's not mountainous, but it's very hilly. So
I'd say it's pretty mountainous in the South Island.
Well, yeah, you've got a range of mountains run right through the centre of the South Island. Then you've got ranges of mountains run right through the North Island as well. But they're not that high, 3,000 odd feet above sea level. But it's still a bloody climb to get up and over them, yes. And it doesn't matter where you go, you've got to traverse one of those mountain ranges to get over and across. But we don't have the harsh conditions that you guys in North America do, or in Canada. We don't have the harsh winter conditions except in the bottom of the South Island.
Right. Yeah. New Zealand's fairly temperate. You're not dealing with 30, 40 below down there.
Yes, that's right. It's
right.
One of the reasons that it's a great little fruit bowl, Gordy.
There's the wineries and fruit growing down around Hastings and then into the Marlborough and the north end of the North Island. You guys have quite an agricultural industry down there. I mean, over and above all the cows and the sheep, which, you talk to an Australian and that's all they can seem to obsess about is the number of sheep that are in New Zealand. Or maybe it goes the other way. I'm not sure.
Australia actually has more, but they're a lot more spread out.
Is that better for the sheep, perhaps?
No, it's just that Australia, unfortunately, doesn't grow much grass.
Trying to tee up with sheep jokes, New Zealand, and you're failing to deliver, sir. Come on.
Yeah, no, mutton is still one of our biggest exports, mutton and beef in the dairy industry here. The whole country really relies on it because we've got very few natural resources. We did have 200 years ago, but they milled most of the native timber. All our forestry is introduced Pinus radiata mainly, which is grown for export timber anyway.
Yeah, I hauled quite a bit of radiata when I was working for Sargison there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, so many moons ago, man. I can't. Like I say, I'm nowhere near as advanced in years as you, Gavin. But I think back, and it was September 2002 when I first rocked up to New Zealand, and that's now 20 years ago.
I was in Aussie then because Mr. Bin Laden's antics in North America had kept us out of Canada at
Oh
that stage.
man, yes. I really I can never get over international criminal reputation you've developed for yourself, Gavin. Could you go over the entire story of what happened to you in Hawaii from start to finish? Because I think it's quite humorous.
No, it wasn't really. I was flying to the UK, Gordy, and through Hawaii, and they pulled us in through immigration, and I actually thought, oh, well, no worries, we'll just go into a layover lounge and carry on. But no, they processed us all through customs. So,
well, so for some information for people that don't remember, back in the day before the introduction of the 777-200 and all these other long distance adaptations of the 747 and whatnot, a trans-Pacific flight would usually stop in Hawaii. There wasn't really too many direct flights across the Pacific until relatively recently.
That's right. So I flew from Sydney in Australia to Hawaii, and then it was supposed to be from Hawaii to, I think, direct to the UK from there. But anyhow, they pulled us into immigration, and in 1973, when I was there, when I was in the Navy, we'd had an altercation with a taxi driver that wanted to give me change of $10 from a $100 bill. So I was supposed to go to court on the Monday. The police were quite happy. I had 4 $100 notes that I got paid. The other 3 were in Malacca, so they checked the numbers. I said they're either, I got paid in 4 numbers, $400 bills, and I said the other 3 are either 3 numbers after this one or 3 numbers before it. But what happened with this taxi driver is I kept $100, slapped him round the ears for being a thief, and sent him on his way rejoicing. The police arrived. That was his first mistake. So anyhow, they checked the numbers in Malacca while I was still held up at the Browway, and they said, righto, be caught on Monday, and it'll all be sorted. Well, it was never sorted because we sailed to come home to New Zealand to go and protest this French nuclear testing in the South Pacific. So, of course, they keep these records, and we had a discussion about that, and they said, oh, yeah, righto. They put me in themselves and said, we'll just hold you in here till your flight goes again. And then they had a shift change, and the lady that came on in charge of the shift had different ideas and wanted to know why I had 2 driver's licenses from 2 countries, and or 3, I think. I had a Canadian one as well. So, yeah, she was trying to make a case out of nothing. So I just told her I was Osama bin Laden. Well, the offsiders laughed at that, so that upset her even more. So that was it. They sent me home rejoicing. So I caught a flight back to the UK through Dubai, I think, and that was the last time that I ever went anywhere near the States, and probably never will again either, Gordy.
Did they give you a lifetime ban for admitting to being Mr. Bin Laden? And this was in 2000. What year was this? Did this take place? This altercation in Hawaii?
2002.
Right. So you can sort of understand how U.S. Customs folks might have been a little bit on edge and perhaps lacking in the sense of humor to which you are richly imbued.
Yes, yes, and that's all it was. Me being a smart bastard and not having a sense of humour. Yeah. So never mind. You get over these things, Gordy. It's in the past, done and dusted, and that's that. So I caught a flight 2 days later to the UK, and I'd teed up the job to go there, and of course I never turned up on the day expected. So that was another bit of a hiccup, but we finally got sorted and pulled pneumatic tankers in the continent, mainly taking zeolite into Italy or Spain, and then bringing powder home, either flour out of France or plastic components out of France or Spain, to go back to the UK.
Yeah, so your trucking career has taken you from New Zealand, Australia, the UK, Europe, northern Canada. You've done quite a bit. You're part of a fairly exclusive club, as far as I know.
Well, possibly, yes, Gordon. There's other guys that have driven other places like Africa and India and South America and all the rest of it. I've never done any of that. Mind you, I've never had any intention of doing any of that. And I didn't go into Eastern Europe. Poland, I guess, was the closest I got, mainly through France down into either Spain or Italy. A little bit of Germany, a little bit of Poland, a little bit of, I can't think of the name of the country, where the First World War, the Western Front, all through that area. But I didn't do much of that either, just maybe a couple or three trips. So, and I did a little bit through France as well, although you traipse through France all the time. And I guess I was lucky because they reopened the Mount Fraser. No, we were going through Fraser, and then they opened the other one, Mount Blanc, I think it was. They reopened that, so we went the other way down into Italy through Switzerland, and that was another experience. I don't much like the Swiss authorities either, Gordon.
I detect a bit of a pattern here, Gavin, and that reminds me of another one of your stories you told me once about. Let's see, there's a famous scene in the first Star Wars movies where Obi-Wan Kenobi uses mind control on the Imperial troops that are in Mos Eisley Spaceport looking for Luke Skywalker's newly acquired droids. Obi-Wan Kenobi uses the Force to dismiss these guards, and I believe something similar happened with you with some French DOT officers. Do you recall?
Yes, péage window. The péage is the motorways, and it's all tolled. And so we used to pay for it on our fuel card, but being on a right-hand drive truck in France, there's no window out the right-hand window, so you got to get out and go round to the left-hand window and swipe your card and then go through the motorway. Well, the police were doing a check on everything, so I get the barrier up, walk back around, climb in my truck, go through it, and they stop me. And the Frenchman pokes his head in the window and says, "Le disc." So I knew he wanted the tacho disc out of the tachometer, and so I offered him my New Zealand passport. So he had a look at that. Then I offered him an Australian driver's license, so he had a look at that. Then I offered him the Dutch operating certificate because I was driving on Dutch plates. He had a look at that, and he had to think about the whole lot, and I could see his mind working over quite gently. He handed the whole lot back to me and says to me in just about perfect English, "You may proceed, sir."
I love it. This is not the Kiwi truck driver you're looking for.
No, all he wanted was that taco disc to check, and they get paid once a month around the 20th. So the 15th, 16th, 17th of the month, they're looking for a bit of easy revenue. But he decided the ramifications of going through all that lot might have been too difficult. So, yeah, left in peace. Yeah.
You've in your travels to the UK, a lot of that's been done with your partner Francie, correct?
Yeah, I went over there first driving, and then I came back to Aussie, I think, and then back home for a bit. No, it was later on when she went over there to work in the dairy industry doing AI and cows, and I used to join her at the end of her shift. Like, she'd do 6 or 8 weeks, and then we'd have a couple of weeks holiday there together and do a canal boat trip. So, yeah, that was sort of later on in the piece, Gordy. When I was over there driving, no, she was back home in New Zealand still.
Okay. And before we started the call, you tell me that Francie kicked you out of the house. So I understand. Are you out in the shed?
No. We have a patio area, I guess, that's covered over with a plastic skin outside and sunscreen sort of underneath it. So, yeah, I'm sitting out here at a table on a cushion chair and quite happy. But you'll get a bit of noise as the odd bit of traffic goes past. Be quiet, Gordy. We've got a road down one side of us, an open paddock on the other, an open paddock behind us, and one neighbour. So, yeah.
The idyllic Kiwi country living.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Oh,
and
very
a real when you look out both sides. So, yeah, it's actually quite good.
Very good. And you used to leave all that behind to go and drive trucks across the subarctic wastelands of the Northwest Territories at first with your mate Mick. And how's Mick doing? I haven't heard from that guy in forever.
Oh, I spoke to him probably 3 months ago. He's due a call, actually. No, he's doing all right. Still working in the salt mine at Onslow, and thinks he'll stay there till he retires. Yeah, he's quite happy.
Oh, very, very good. And maybe tell anybody listening here how it was that you and Mick ended up in Yellowknife.
Yeah, we were both working for different contractors in Karratha in Australia's northwest. He was driving for Andy Stacey, I think, carting rocks, and I was driving for somebody else. And we crossed paths on the wharf. And then a year or so later, I was doing some work running into Mount Newman and that, just on general deliveries. And I had arranged to go somewhere. It meant time away from work, and I needed somebody to fill in my place, and Mick wasn't doing anything at that stage, so he filled that in for me, and then he explained how he had been to Canada and spoken at Robinson's Trucking and wanted to go over and do the ice road. So he put in for it, but by the time he got the work permit, the season was already over, so he never went. So he spoke about that, and I said, well, Jesus, I'd be keen on having a crack at that. And he said, well, we'll put in for it again earlier and see if we can get there. So I was down in the southwest doing harvest, Christmas time, just about a week before Christmas, when we got a phone call to say that, Canada had allowed the permits for us. So we were the first 2 drivers from outside of the US to actually get work permits as drivers to work in Canada. And it was, the work permit only stated for however many weeks it was for the ice road. But when I got there and went through immigration, he gave me 6 months. He'd asked me a couple of times how long I wanted to stay in Canada, and I was thinking, well, I'm quite happy to stay and work, but I don't know that I need that much of a holiday. So I said, well, I don't know. The permit says this. He said, I'm not worried about the permit. So I said, oh, right, 6 months. So he did the paperwork, and he said, there you are. You've got a 6-month work permit, and when before that's up, if you want to stay for a holiday, you apply for a holiday visa. I said, so you've given me 6 months, and that immigration thing says it's only for a few weeks. He said, they've allowed you to come in and work. You speak the same language as me. Look at all these buggers, he says, and he points round him, and it's full of Asians, and he said, they're all doctors, lawyers, or accountants, and every one of them will be working in a Chinese takeaway by tomorrow morning. You're part of the Commonwealth. You're one of us. So I said, well, Jesus, can you change it to 2 years? He said, I asked you twice how long you want to stay.
You weren't picking up what he was putting down, Gavin.
No, I didn't have my thinking cap on there and then, Gordy. Yeah, but never mind, it worked. And
what year was this that you and Mick first made it over?
2000.
Right, and you ended up doing 10 years, 10 seasons on the ice, correct?
Well, minus a couple or three because Mr. Bin Laden threw a spanner in the works. So it was 2004 before we got back.
I'll share a little anecdote here. My first year on the ice would have been 2006. I went up with another Kiwi, my good mate Nigel, from up Rotorua way, who I met while I was hauling logs. And I remember, I can't remember what lake it was I passed you. You were coming south, and you were in a West Can truck, and you had a New Zealand flag tied to the handles on the side of the cab. And I looked over and I thought, is that a New Zealand or an Australian flag? And I obviously heard you on the radio, and I think we had a little chit chat quickly. I eventually caught up with you at Robinson's yard in Yellowknife, and I'll never forget this as long as I live, Gav. I saw you parked in the yard. You know how they're so Robinson Trucking, for those listening, they have like a lake in their backyard, and in the winter it freezes, and that's what they use to park all the overflow trucks and contractors that come up to work on the ice. So basically imagine a truck stop, but it's built on a lake. So you're literally using a lake as the parking lot. And Gavin here had got out of his truck to go into the camp building and get himself something to eat and a shower. And he was wearing a pair of flip-flops walking from his truck into the camp at, minus God knows how much. And I thought it was all quite comical.
Yeah, I got a bit of ribbing about that quite often, Gordy, but it's logic. If you're out about 5 minutes in the ice, you're right. But any more than that, and your feet start to freeze. So, I'd get back in and warm up again pretty smartly. But 2 or 3 minutes is it doesn't really count. So, why hold your feet and have them pinched or whatever, or filled up with bloody ice? Or, lots of things used to happen.
Yeah, well, this particular spirit of yours served you well up there, Gav, because if I recall correctly, you hold the record for most number of loads of fuel hauled from Hay River up to the mine in one season. Is that not correct?
No, I don't think quite Gordy, because some of those loads were actually out of Yellowknife as well.
Okay, but you still put in the hard yards, though.
Yes. Yeah. I think that was one of the reasons they were quite happy to have me back. I'm sure it wasn't my personality.
Well, as someone who likes to think I'm in your realm of the personality zone, I didn't last too long at WestCan either. I mean, I did 2 seasons hauling anhydrous for them in Saskatchewan after the ice. And then Saskatchewan changed the rules. You'll remember that Alberta and Saskatchewan had their own hours of service rules. In Alberta, some people refer to it as the oil field exemption, although I don't know how much it has to do with the oil field, but basically you're allowed to work 3 weeks straight, 15 hours a day without taking a day off to reset, as long as you stay within the province of Alberta. And Saskatchewan had something much the same, which was beneficial to use in fertilizer season and in harvest, right? So anyway, I did 2 seasons hauling anhydrous for WestCan out of Saskatoon, and sort of traveled all over central and northern Saskatchewan, and did not bad by them, made a few bucks. And then Saskatchewan decided to go on federal logbook rules and got rid of their provincial exemptions. One of the guys from Saskatoon calls me up one year and says, "Hey, you going to come back and haul anhydrous for us this spring?" And I said, "Well, I hear they got rid of the exemption in Saskatchewan. I'm only going to be able to work 5 days a week." And they said, "Yep." And I said, "Okay, so what are you doing to make up for this?" And they said, "Well, we're increasing the kilometer rate by 1 or 2 cents per kilometer." And I said, "I don't think that's going to make up for 2 full days of work over, 6 to 8 weeks of the season." They said, "Well, no, probably not, but that's what we're giving you." And I said, "Okay, great. Have a nice day." And that was the last I ever dealt with WestCan. I mean, I think they just got so used to having the newfies come out there and do all the juice for them, and they were quite happy to hang out at the hotel in Saskatoon on their days off. And I mean, no disrespect to Saskatoon. I did meet a few people there and had a good time, but like, I wasn't out there to hang out. I was out there to work. Their lack of interest in somehow working around these new stupid rules indicated to me that they weren't worth working for anymore.
Yeah, I think you have to look at it a wee bit different from our perspective as drivers, Gordy. They look at it from the perspective of people working in regulations. Like, I know many years later at Bonnie Rock, I was having a conversation with the owner, Jim Curry, and he was talking about these contracts for doing the oil and gas deliveries up to the Great Sandy Desert and that. And he said, "Oh, there's so much in here that we have to put in." Like he said, "I have to put in the percentage of Indigenous drivers." And I said, "Good God, what's..." Oh, he said, "It's all to do with public relations and everything else." I said, "So you've got 1 or 2? "Yes," he said, "I've got 2. But," he said, "I need a 3rd. I said, "Oh, Jim Glasgow, he's got a bit of Maori in him." He said, "Has he?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, right," he said, "I'll put his name down." So I never thought anything more about it until about a week later I meet up with Jimmy Glasgow in Dampier. Oh, and he was a little bit livid. I said, "What's your problem?" He said, "You told the boss that I've got a bit of Maori in me." I said, "Well, I thought you did." "Ah, be buggerties." Anyhow, Jimmy went down as an Indigenous driver, and he wasn't thrilled about it, but it was already on.
I remember seeing there was a lot of Maori fellas up hauling iron ore into Port Hedland. Quite a few of them quads were piloted by Maori fellas.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There's this whole thing like maybe people that are listening here in North America don't know, but Australia and New Zealand have an agreement, and anyone from New Zealand can come and work in Australia and vice versa. Although I think most of the traffic goes in one direction. And there's quite a few Kiwis working in Oz because, their economy's bigger and the pay scales are a bit better. And so, throughout the sort of resource extraction and mining industries in Australia, you see quite a few Kiwis, eh?
Yes. And that kind of work seems to attract those guys too. And and fair play to them. It's big money, but it's shift work, and you have to be cut out for shift work to enjoy it.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
You're done to do anything else. So it's one of those things, Gordy. You either like shift work or you don't, or you lump with it. Yeah.
Right. You are are you currently retired or semi-retired? Or are you doing any trucking at all right now?
No, I'm 74 years old, and I'm not doing any more trucking, mate. Not in the near future that I can see. Just the regulations here in New Zealand, I can't be bothered with anymore, Gordy. My last stint was for Simon's, hauling milk in the flush of the dairy season, and forward-facing cameras and cameras on the driver and the cab, and just all the regulations. Just nah. You keep it, I'll retire gracefully. I just can't see the sense. And what they're trying to do, and I understand it, but they're going about it the wrong way, in my opinion. They're trying to stop drivers from falling asleep at the wheel, right? But the guys that are falling asleep at the wheel are not normal drivers to me. They're either inexperienced or on drugs or booze or whatever. There's no reason why you can't keep intact behind the wheel. It's just some people don't, and there's obvious reasons why they don't. But it's the whole story. Everybody suffers the consequence of the lowest denominator. It's a sad way that this bloody world works. It's, to me, just wean them out and carry on. But that's the way it was. And they rang me up and said, your seat's shaking and you're falling asleep at the wheel. And I said, I'm actually looking in the mirrors down the left-hand side and weaving the truck to check on the tyres. But you, being an office swaller, wouldn't understand that. So he got a bit indignant and said he drove for years, and I said, well, if you were any good, you'd still be driving and not pushing pins behind a desk. I'm not on a smartphone, I'm on my normal brick. So then he has a go at me using the phone while I'm driving, and I said, well, you rang. That was about the end of that job.
I don't want to impugn you with this particular attitude, Gavin, but just from where I'm sitting, a gentleman with your depth and length of experience on the road being told how to do your job is just it's offensive almost. Well, this informs part of my writing, right? Like I started this little thing. There's a blogging platform called Substack, and you get them automatically in your emails. You're one of my subscribers, and in America, the free, they never met a regulation they didn't like, and because they will not do as you identified, like if you're a good enough truck driver, you can stay awake and you can do the hard yards, but they're not looking for truck drivers. They're looking for bodies and seats because they've removed professionalism from the job, and they don't want to pay the good guys that know what they're doing a high enough salary to stick around. So they rely on new people all the time, and then they rely on the government to subsidize the training for the new people. So it's easier to soak the taxpayer than to treat fellas like yourself with respect. And that's a major problem here. And it's rather unfortunate for me to hear about that happening in New Zealand, because I had a very, very good time in New Zealand when I was there, even when I was working for Sargison. It struck me that like Kiwis were pretty straightforward people, pretty no nonsense. It seemed like they had a light touch towards regulation, like do what's smart, and you guys know what you're doing. They would give you a hiding or a bail up if you did something stupid, and then if you didn't, they left you alone. I always thought of New Zealand as like a pretty cool place in that regard, but perhaps it's changed since I've been down there.
Changed dramatically, Gordon. Logbook rules are really enforced with these onboard cameras and everything else, and it's all hooked up to the Ministry of Transport or whatever they call themselves these days. So, yeah, electronic logbooks are tied into it. Yeah, and logbooks are...
It seems so weird that you guys have logbooks, because like 98% of Kiwi truck drivers go home at the end of the day because it's a smaller country. And unless you're, running between the islands or get stuck out somewhere, most guys go home at the end of the day. And if not, they'll stay at like a motel or a pub somewhere along the road, right?
That's right. They still have a regulation that you cannot sleep in a moving vehicle. Like when I came home from Canada in 2001, after I'd been there, and we weren't going back, I applied to the Ministry of Transport for Francie and I to run a two-up thing as a trial, and it just came straight back, no way. So yeah, it's a commitment on the regulations here. So everyone runs logbooks, and people are now sleeping in their trucks, but all the trucks are taken up with cargo space, so there's no decent-sized sleepers on them. Yeah, and you're right, we're only a small country, but it takes a long while to get from A to B because of the hills. The main route through both islands follows fairly easy country, but you've still got to climb one way or another up over a mountain range. So up through the desert road from Turangi, it's not steep, but it's a slow haul all the way up there and then all the way down the other side.
Were you ever part of the Turangi 500 at any time in your career?
Oh, I did stints of Turangi swaps or Taupo swaps at different parts of it, but no, when I first started driving long distance here was with an outfit called Modern Traitors that turned into Transpac and then went broke. But no, there were no logbooks then, so we just drove and you slept when you wanted to sleep. And yeah, the job got done, and I don't know that there was that many accidents or anything like that, but that was probably late 1970s, early 1980s, and that's when they brought in logbooks here. So the logbooks are very good for regulations, Gordy, but what they fail to take into account, and there's no regulations, is for trucks parked waiting, either waiting to unload or waiting to load. And that's the biggest, cheapest form of warehousing that any company has got, is to have a truck full of a yard full of trucks waiting.
Right. I know that's a major problem here in the US. But again, when I was in New Zealand, and things may have changed since I was there, it struck me that because of the cost of doing business in New Zealand, because the fuel is so much more expensive, the equipment's so much more expensive, and because of the culture that Kiwis have of like get her done and working pretty hard, that the sort of detention and loading and unloading delays were a lot less there than they were in other places. Has that changed as well?
Yes, that's gone backwards. There's a lot more of it now, Gordy, because there's many more trucks on the road as the population grows and freight volumes have increased dramatically. Like 20 years ago, there was very little freight coming forward to stuff, cheaply made stuff out of Taiwan and China is probably increased tenfold into shops that people can purchase, a pocket knife, for instance, that's going to last a day and a half for $1.
Right.
Instead of a proper Swiss Army pocket knife that'll last for years. So our landfills are getting filled by this virtual rubbish that people are buying because they want it and they have it, and 5 minutes later it's buggered, so it goes into the landfill. So yeah, the business has increased dramatically, and of course wait times have increased with it.
Wow, I did not know that. That's interesting to hear, and thank you for the update.
No, well, it's just like the rest of the world, and I guess it's no different to us. You have exactly the same overseas. I mean, we were buying leather caps in Canada that when you looked inside, it was made in China, and that was only 12 or 13 years ago,
I've heard the population in New Zealand breached 5 million people here. Was it recently or is this old news?
Oh, no, it's fairly old news. We're probably 5.5 now. So, yeah, it's only a fiddle in a teacup, I know, but...
Well, but like when I was there in 2002, it was only just over 4. So, I mean, in 20 years to increase your population by over 25%, that's something.
I was in the Navy in Auckland when it reached 500,000. And that was and there was only about a 3 million population then. And so yes, it's growing, and like I don't know, the states are 850 million or 850 odd million, aren't they? So yeah.
No, the United States, I believe, is 330 million ish. I mean, who knows, because they can't seem to control the southern border, and nobody knows how many people are living here without papers. Canada, I think last I heard, is 38 million ish, maybe 37, 36, somewhere in the high 30s.
Yeah.
So yeah, New Zealand is still kind of, there's more people in Toronto than there is in New Zealand.
That'd be right. That'd be dead right. And a consequence of that, of course, is we don't get the cheap things, if you like, because they're mass produced for your area, but not mass produced for us. So the price of cars and bikes and trucks and machinery is exorbitant because we don't sell that many down here, and plus it's got to be shipped here from overseas. And even the ships now, we have a huge shipping since this COVID bloody thing ran around the world. We're not getting the empty containers here to fill them up. There's no money in carting empty containers. It's all in full containers. So you can understand the shipping companies not wanting to cart empties here.
Interesting, and because during it's funny, and your supply chain people in New Zealand probably know this, and they probably find it infuriating. But during the height of the, as you put it, the COVID nonsense, or I call it the COVID regime, the ports in North America famously had all these backlogs. Like at one point, there was something like 115 vessels off the coast of Los Angeles waiting to get unloaded. and there was all kinds of weird stuff going on with the movement of shipping containers. And they literally had fields of empties sitting here in the US because the shipping companies wouldn't take them back. So there was just these massive yards stacked to the sky with empty cans just sitting there not doing anything. And here's you poor Kiwis, you can't even get any to do your exports. It's madness.
That's right. It's the old story with back rates and trucking. Back rates and shipping is exactly the same, and until they get rid of the capitalistic idea that you have to make economies work and just pay the same both ways, an empty container gets paid the same as a full container. That way they're happy to move them at a going rate. But when you imagine a ship loading up 300 containers loaded and 300 empties and only getting quarter of the price for taking an empty one, it just makes economic sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Why bother?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
On the cost of equipment, I was speaking with our mutual friend Nigel, who now lives sort of Tauranga, Mount Maunganui, and I don't know if you've spoken with him recently, but him and his wife Karen bought a truck, eh?
Yes, I knew he had bought a truck.
So we were discussing this on the phone one day, and I'm just presenting this anecdote for my American and Canadian listeners about the cost of doing business in New Zealand versus the cost here. I think by the time, the way Nigel explained it, he says by the time he bought the truck, put the bolsters on it, bought the trailer, got all the radios, registration, everything kitted out, ready to hit the road, he was over 600,000 New Zealand dollars before he was had carted a load.
That'd be right.
And
that would be right.
That's probably what, 400 grand US exchange rates right about now.
Yes, and that's a funny thing, Gord. When I was in the Navy, we changed from pounds, shillings, and pence to dollars. And the first time I went to the States, in 1968, I think it was, to Hawaii, the dollar we were getting about $3.50 American dollars to a Kiwi dollar. Last time I went, which was 1973, it was down to about $3 or just under American for a Kiwi dollar. Well, now a Kiwi dollar is worth about 60 cents US. So
wow.
Progressively, our economy has gone, or our value of our currency is devalued dramatically.
Wow. That's so interesting, given you guys are an export oriented economy, right? Because you're exporting dairy products and beef and mutton and forestry products. Like, you guys move a lot of logs out of that country too, eh?
Yes.
Your other famous industry, I'll ask you this just because you're home and you're an avid reader of the news and you're there. Has New Zealand's tourism industry recovered yet since Jacinda decided to cut you guys off from the rest of the world for a little holiday?
Yes, it has, and it's booming. There's
really?
motorhomes all over the show, and there's another anecdote. Tourism has progressed over the last 30 years, just about unstoppable, but the cost of tourism in this country is horrendous, Gordy. And we as Kiwis, to go on a ski lift, a jet boat tour, a bloody bungee jump, anything like that, is an arm and a leg for us.
Because the locals are charging the foreigners because the foreigners' money is worth more and they're trying to cash in, correct?
Yes, an American coming here, exactly the same, comes here with $300. When he changes it to Kiwi, he's got $900. So he's got money to burn. So the prices for us as New Zealanders are exorbitant, and we don't use them. So a lot of them went broke during the COVID shutdown, and that's their own fault because they overcharged and they never made allowances for it stopping. They didn't think the train was going to stop. Yeah, I actually had no sympathy for those fellas that had half a dozen helicopters or half a dozen fixed-wing aircraft that are expensive to operate. But if they'd have stuck with two, they'd have been all right. But no, they expanded to meet the service. So when the service stopped, of course, you've got to pay for these things that aren't working, and they didn't have the wherewithal to do it.
Who's that? Remind me of the name of that fellow, the guy who sort of popularized bungee jumping. Was it AJ Hackett or something?
That's him, yeah.
Is he still around? Is he your age now? Like, where's that fella?
Oh, I've no idea, Gordy. He basically took what the Papua New Guineans were doing, jumping from up in the trees on those vines, and refined it. And good luck to him. He's made a fortune out of it. They're doing it all over the world. But no, I've no idea where he is. He could be here. He could be in Switzerland. God knows. Yeah.
So something else about New Zealand, perhaps you could clarify for myself and my audience. A truism when I was there was that at any given time, 10% of New Zealand's population was living overseas, either in Australia or other locations around the world. Is that correct?
Yes, easily that, Gordon, possibly more.
Right.
Yes.
And I if I remember correctly, there was a bit of an issue once the COVID hysteria hit full tilt boogie, that many New Zealanders who were living overseas had some troubles getting home.
Yes.
And this was a major problem and turned into some political issues. Yes?
Yes, it did. But what they did was they earmarked certain hotels and put quarantine regulations on them, and people were in those hotels for 3 weeks at the government's expense. But they couldn't get out for 3 weeks, and a lot of them were bitching and beefing about that. But I think it was done, in all honesty, until they got everybody inoculated against it, and there's still a hell of a lot of that going on, that people aren't vaccinated against it. And I just don't understand some people, Gordon. They seem to think if you get a vaccination, you'll wind up with little green men running around inside your brain or some bloody thing. I just don't understand.
I see where you're saying with that, but like, I don't know how much, again, like you live in New Zealand, and we have a major problem around the world with media and their seeming ability to suppress information. You probably would have gathered from my writing activities.
And expand disinformation, Gordy. Don't forget that.
Yeah, sure. So I was involved with defending this freedom convoy thing in Canada. And one of the reasons is that it's been well understood by anybody paying attention, and even the pharmaceutical companies, that their products do not prevent transmission nor infection of COVID. And what happened in Canada was that Prime Minister Trudeau decided after, in January of this year, 2022, after nearly 2 years of this quote unquote pandemic, that he was going to enforce this vaccine rule on truck drivers who previous to that point had been working their butts off, keeping the economy going whilst many things were shut down and not working properly. But Trudeau never offered any evidence that truck drivers carried the virus around, that they were more susceptible to it than anybody else. And he also conveniently ignored the pharmaceutical company's own information saying that it did not prevent transmission. So what's the point imposing this mandate on people if the vaccine, if the product that the media and the government are going around telling everybody is going to be our salvation and key out of getting out of this problem doesn't actually do what they're saying. I mean, sure, it probably, reduces the effect of the virus on the people who've taken it. I'll grant them that. But if they're throwing people out of work and shutting the economy down because they're afraid of transmission and spread when the vaccine does not actually do anything to address that, then what was the point? What was the point of upending people's rights to bodily autonomy, rights to pursue a job, rights to visit their family and travel? Because I don't know how bad it got in New Zealand, Gav. I mean, I understand Ms. Ardern's a bit of a controversial figure in her own right, but in Canada, you know how big Canada is, and you know how hard it is to travel in like the second largest geographic landmass on Earth. If you can't fly or take a bus or get on the train, because Trudeau literally mandated that you couldn't if you didn't provide proof that you'd taken this vaccine, which kind of, what's the point of that if it doesn't prevent transmission? And this is why, the Freedom Convoy happened, and we've had all of this drama in Canada, as it were. So, I don't know how that translates to your experience in New Zealand, but like when you understand it in that way, and you have to measure what they're doing against previously accepted principles of people being able to go to work and to travel without question, and you yourself being a veteran, ostensibly in service to your country's navy to defend such principles. Like, how'd that work in New Zealand, and what do you reckon?
Well, when the COVID hit, I was actually working as a district support manager for the Returned Servicemen's Association, and our mandate was simply you need to be vaccinated. So I can't disagree with what you're saying. I've had COVID myself, but it was after I'd been vaccinated. I didn't even know I had it until we did the test, and it was there. I suffered no effects. I had a cough and a runny nose for about 2 days, and that was it. It was all over. So whether the vaccination worked or not is debatable, but our simple reasoning was, if you're going to go out into the homes of veterans, you need to be vaccinated against it. Now, whether it stopped it or not, I don't know, but that was the mandate that was given.
Right.
So that's what the bulk of us did, just get vaccinated. It costs nothing. Had there been a price to it, Gordy, perhaps I would have differed, but it was supplied by the government, which I in turn paid for anyway. Just have it and get on with it.
Right. Now, on that note, you in your capacity, like over and above what you were doing with the Murroa veterans, you are also helping other veterans, regardless of their services, to access things, help them get their groceries, help them get to doctor's appointments. Like, you were doing a whole bunch of stuff during COVID to help your fellow vets, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's very commendable. Something else I wanted to ask you about, speaking of the service to your fellow veterans, and I mean, this is real inside baseball. The only people that are going to understand what I'm saying are other people that were on the ice that know you, but I don't care. I want to say it anyway because I think it's in your favor. Is you worked your ass off when you were on the ice, right? You put most young guys to bed, including me. I had trouble keeping up with you the few times like our routing was congruent. The drive that made you work as hard as you do and to pile up stacks, to borrow an American phrase, which means make money, was in order to pay for these lawyers who are fighting on behalf of the Murroa people. Is that not correct?
Well, no, not quite correct. We don't have many lawyers involved, Gordy, because I come from the other side of the coin, knowing that they're university educated and They might have a lot more knowledge than me, but I don't believe in paying for their services, no.
But you're still, but the point is, though, is that you have taken a lot of the profits of your hard work, if you will, to use in this fight for your fellow veterans, like whether it's paying for lawyers or doing other things.
Yes, to a certain degree, more voluntary than anything else, and it's not something that I like to talk about, to be quite honest. It's what you do privately is...
I understand that, Gav. What I'm trying to do here is I'm not trying to like have you toot your own horn, but what I'm saying is like the service that the driving force of part of your life is in service to your fellow vets, which I think is highly commendable, whether it's doing what you did to help them out during COVID or the crazy lengths you went to on the ice, right? Like part of that was for them.
Oh, yes, very true. But you have to realize, of course, Gord, and you would know this yourself, having worked in other countries, the majority of us that leave home to go and work elsewhere go to work. You're there for a reason, and that's work. And that's to make the most of the opportunity that you have to better your living. Now, I know there's some that go for a holiday, and that's fine. But my reason always for travelling overseas was to go to work. And if you're there to work, then work is the operative word. You go to work. And on the ice, as you know, it's only a short season, so let's just get into it and get as much as we can done.
I remember you explaining the mathematics of timing, how much you could get done in each turn, and perhaps just as a sort of unique anecdotal story, you could tell us how the math in your head works when you're doing laps from Yellowknife or Hay River up to the mines.
The math in your head work to get on with it as much as you can. So, as you know, it's all slow speed limit. So if they'll collar you if you're 3 kilometres over the limit. If you keep an eye on the time and the distances that you have to travel, and I was lucky enough to be furnished with a list of all the lakes and the portages, and I knew the timing. So to go from Yellowknife to Lockhart, they allowed you 8 hours, and they'd let you in 7.5, right? So I always used to try and make it in 7.25, just to put, and that quarter of hour made a great difference. And it used to rile the dispatcher at Lockhart every time we came in, and we were a quarter of an hour early. You guys must have been speeding. Well, I don't know that we were speeding, but we weren't going slow. And there's a huge difference. Well, when you're set at 20 and 30 kilometres an hour, or 25, and you've got to slow down to 10 to get on and off the lakes and all the rest of it, if you spread that all out like they did in the office, it's going to take you 8 hours. But if you can pick up a few extra on the portages or on the lakes of where you slowed down 10, if you can pick that up over 5 or 6 Ks to get back up as though you did it at 25 or 30, then that brings your time down. And time is what you get paid for, right? You get paid per trip completed when you get back empty. And the quicker you can do that within their legal framework, the better off you're going to be. It's quite simple. You break your day down into say, a 12-hour day or 14-hour day, whatever it is. And the idea is to get from A to B. And you know yourself, Hay River, Yellowknife as well, there's queues to load. When you get to the mine, there's queues to unload. Once again, the cheapest form of warehousing is to have the fuel or have the product in a truck parked outside your building. It costs you nothing to have it there. You've paid to get it there, but when you get it off, is entirely up to your own program. The driver has nothing to do with it. He's just the piece of crap in the middle that has to put up with the tunes, isn't he? So, yeah, you've got to time everything. That whole ice road business was all about keeping out of the rush. So you got ahead of the queue and either stayed there or worked your way back up through it and got ahead of it again. It's if you looked at it in an overall aerial picture in your own mind, there were two big blobs coming and going. And if you got in between those blobs, you had a free run.
Right. Staying out of the crowd, doing your own thing.
Exactly. And security were geared to be around those blobs to police it. Right?
Right.
The more traffic, the more infringements, everything else. That was their whole idea. So if you were out of those blobs, you never saw them.
They were pretty sparse too, because I think they only had like 2 security trucks at Lac de Gras and a couple more at Lockhart and a couple more at Dome Lake. So I think at any given time, there would only ever be 6 security trucks on the entire length of the ice.
Yes, that's correct.
So,
and they would position themselves in an area where they knew the mass would be. Where the biggest concentration of trucking was, they knew because they were in radio contact with all the lakes and the dispatch points and receiving points. So they knew where the masses were going to be. And you only had to look at the timetable out of Yellowknife from 4 o'clock in the morning. It was solid except for a break around 7 where breakfast was on, so people would have breakfast before they went, the same at lunchtime and the same with the evening meal. So if you could get yourself dispatched and organised for those times, you got in ahead of the race. So the whole story, quite often they said to me, oh, it's steak and prawns at the camp tonight. You know, I'm going to stay for dinner. And I used to say, I can have steak and prawns any time I want, but not during this short period. So I'd go. We'd go to steak. Go. Yeah. So
I remember one time I got stuck up at BHP because a windstorm had come through. And as you know, when the wind blows on all that snow and the visibility goes down to nothing, they close the ice. And that's, you know, you use that time to catch up on your sleep or maintain the truck and get your laundry done, depending on how long the closure is. And I was stuck at BHP, and it happened to be on a Saturday night, and they'd had some kind of bonus program, and they had a band playing. They'd flown in from Newfoundland and surf and turf, as much prime rib and lobster tails as you could eat. I quite enjoyed that.
Yes. And I was probably stuck at the end of lockout and a lockdown.
Yeah. Oh, everybody does a turn at the Portage 49 Hotel and Resort. That's for sure. I used to have a photo of you that I took when you were driving Ivor McGill's truck, and we were all stuck at 49. They'd closed the road. We got to the end of McKay Lake, and there was probably 24 of us sitting in 49 heading north. And they finally got everything cleared out. They'd sent a pickup down and announced to everybody that we could resume our travels. And I managed to grab my camera and I took a photo of you in Ivor McGill's truck. And oh man, for the life of me, it's gone. I uploaded it to Facebook and then I deleted my Facebook account, and the picture is lost to the digital world. And it was one of the finest photos of you I think I've ever seen, Gav.
Well, there you go, Jordy. Yeah.
Right. So you did a number of seasons up on the ice. You also managed to convince Jim Curry at Bonnie Rock Transport in Perth to hire me and my old man.
Yeah, that wasn't that hard, convincing Jim Curry. The hardest part was the paperwork, if you like, getting you in there. And then the hardest part for me was the bloody human resources people that seem to think that they're in charge, and they forget that they're only a number in the system. And it's annoyed me for many a year that office wallers suddenly think that they're more important than the people actually doing the job, the ones that make the bread and butter that they feed on. It's riled me for a long time that somebody jumps into human resources and they're in an office and now they're in charge of everything. Well, they forget their station in life. They're like bloody insurance, car salesman and real estate salesman, Gordy. In my opinion, they're just a drain on the economy. They do nothing for it. They don't work.
Wow.
They just...
I have a friend who's an intellectual and a writer. He lives in Sweden, and that's one of his projects, is highlighting what you've just said, but perhaps in a slightly more diplomatic fashion. Well, I mean, I appreciate greatly what you did, because, prior to me coming to work for Bonnie Rock, I had tried on my own to get to Australia and drive road trains, and I'd failed a couple of times. First time I showed up, I was very young and naive and didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was only 20, and I probably was unqualified to do most of the trucking I was already doing in Canada. Despite doing things old school and learning the old ways, I was still wet behind the ears. And then when I went back a second time in 2004, I had no work visa and no contacts and didn't know anybody, and I had nobody batting for me in my corner. And then I meet you on the ice, and because of your history with Mr. Curry and in Western Australia, you were able to help me out, and I'm forever grateful for that. Eh?
No, that's right. And then you bugger, we got you organised, and you set off on another project. So I spoke to the old man and said, "Well, what's stopping you from coming?"
Oh,
he said, "I was good." And I said, "Well, are you going to wait?" So he elected to come himself. And it was a pity that the guy in charge in Dampier and Lenny didn't strike it off to start with. And that's always one of the sad things in life, is you cross paths with a workmate or a boss that you can't get on with. And it's just one of those things. You have to grin and bear it. And I admired the steadfast way the old man stuck with it, because others.
Yeah, he put up with a lot of shit from Dan and Mr. Sausage Roll, Nick Roll. I wonder what those guys are doing. I haven't really kept much in touch with any of the Aussie guys, despite the fact I liked most of them. Like Norman at the yard and Dampier was, I think a top bloke in his own way, and guys like Oil Can Greg. If I were to do another one of these conversations with a gentleman more senior than me, that's also or much more experienced, I'd love to get a hold of Greg. That guy's did everything in Oz.
Yeah, well, as far as I know, he's retired and living down the southwest now. Yeah. He was going to go to England because his wife was English, but I don't think it ever happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember, what's the name? There's a national park sort of east of Dampier and Karratha where they have all these gorges that are like down in the desert, and they're like these little oases, and there's water flowing through them and everything.
Yeah, likes of Wittenham and those places, yeah. Well, Wittenham's all closed down now because that used to be an asbestos mine.
Yeah. So it's south of Wittenham. It's Carragini. That's what it's called, Carragini.
Carragini, although it's on the tourist map and that, Wittenham is actually a hell of a lot prettier, Gordy. And
Okay.
I'm lucky in that I got to go to Wittenham and through it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, Wittenham. There's a really famous song. There's a band from Australia who are quite popular in the 80s and 90s called Midnight Oil, and they were one of the few Australian bands that sort of punctured the American cultural consciousness. And
Right.
one of their famous songs was called Blue Sky Mine, which it was about Wittenham without naming Wittenham, you know?
Yeah.
And as far as our friend Greg goes, Oil Can Greg, I remember him telling me that when the government opened Carragini National Park, he was up there working on road graders and excavators and loaders and whatnot. He actually built some of the roads getting in and out of there.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and some of those guys spent most of their working life in the Northwest. You know what it's like, Gordy. It was never going to be a place I could retire to. And was full of bloody Australians and flies, eh?
Yeah, and nothing. I mean, people, Americans and Canadians that have never been, they might see Crocodile Dundee or or Outback Truckers or some other weird cultural export from Australia. It's hard to describe just how much nothing there is there, right? Like when you're heading east, when you're heading west from Sydney and the populated areas on the East Coast, like it's just flat scrubland, and you drive across it for 4 days till you get to Perth, and then it's the same thing going north, and the only thing that changes is maybe the color of the dirt. And the Northwest, to its great credit, there's the Hammersley Ranges where all that iron ore is, and everything's quite red and spectacular in its own way. But the sort of vastness and emptiness of that joint, it's hard to describe to people, isn't it?
Yes, but the easiest way to describe it is when you get a flat tire and you're out and you got to have a set of gloves on because the tire lever is that bloody hot you can't hang on to it. But you jack it up, you change that tire and put another one back on there, and all in, the high 40s, perhaps 50s degree of heat. And you've got to get off the bitumen to do it because the heat coming off the bitumen is unbearable. And so, yeah, just changing a bloody tire and those kind of temperatures, I know it's bad in the ice. I've been there, done that too, but I think I know which one I prefer. Unfortunately, I used to get bailed up with those bloody low loaders. And they had a vein in between the jewels to dissipate the heat between the tires. So if you got a flat on the inside, you had to jack the bloody thing up either side and then drop that axle down to get it under this bloody plate in between. Oh, it was a real bastard of a thing. So to change a tire on that was about an hour and a half bloody work.
Oh, gross.
Take both tires off, jack the thing right up, and then let the axle down so you can get the tire off out behind this bloody plate. Oh, they were terrible.
Right. So, well, one of the things I like to tell people is that I'm a big advocate of driving slow. Even over here in America with high speed limits and not nearly the same conditions, but being on the ice and being in the outback engender in you the same attitude towards speed on the ice because you're regulated as such because of the conditions of the ice and trying to maintain the ice, and that's fine. But then in Australia, because of the heat and the weight you're pulling is so hard on the equipment, and then it's hard on the tires. And when you're 800 miles north of Perth in the middle of nowhere, if you blow a tire, it's on you to change it. Well, you adapt your driving so as not to risk blowing tires. So you just end up being quite happy doing 80 or 85 kilometers an hour, which here in America is 50 miles an hour. And most Yanks can't wrap their head around driving that slow whatsoever. Like I might as well be talking to them about living on Jupiter.
Yes, yes, and you learn that by experience. And of course, the more trailers you pull, the slower you go. So, and I always used to see them and chuckle that they'd hook up north of Woburn with a triple and be away at 100 k's an hour, and within 100 k's north of Woburn, you'd see them on the side of the road doing tyre changes, and you'd think, oh well, you'll learn. But yeah, it's one of those things that comes with common sense and experience, Gordy, and that's the other unfortunate part is a lot of people now have been educated to the level that common sense has gone out the window. They've got none left. It's
right.
Well,
Gavin, you've been very generous with your time, and I don't want to hold up your day here any further. I've no idea what you've got planned, but is there any final or parting thoughts you have?
No, not really good for your part of the world. It's a different world to what we have down here, but the same sort of thing with regulations, and I don't see the trucking industry changing any until they get rid of a hell of a lot of these so-called regulations that are there for supposedly safety. Like right now in this country, they're reducing the speed limits on roads to make them safer. Well, for Christ's sake, spend the money that you earn off the motorists actually on the roads instead of other bloody things and fix the roads, and we might get somewhere.
The use of road taxes and fuel taxes and whatnot is going to general slush funds to pay the salaries of the managerial caste is a worldwide concern. It's not unique to New Zealand.
No, that's right. That's right. We're all governed too much, and it doesn't matter whether public or local body servants. There's far too many of the buggers, and they've created a niche for themselves where they need to be there to empower all the regulations they've made. If you got rid of 3/4 of them and 3/4 of the governing regulations, we'd be right. Let the cowboys go. They'll soon come to grief anyway by their own waywardness. Just let them go, and it'll soon sort itself out.
Right. Rather than encouraging and empowering entrance to the industry, all sorts of people who shouldn't be here and will turn out to be more of a problem than the cowboys.
Well, right. And we all have immigrant populations that's rife here now. So people that can't even speak the language are getting licenses and operating. They come from third world countries where they don't have the combinations that we have. And sure, we don't have big combinations in New Zealand, but we have reasonably heavy combinations, like the weight limit's now up to 54 tonne, and the meterage, you're still only a 19 metre unit. So, yeah, we're restricted in size and weight simply because of the country's topography, and I get that. But why we have to have all the regulations around a driver's workplace, I just don't understand it. It's not contributing anything to road safety at all. If they paid everybody a decent bloody living wage, they wouldn't have the problems that they do. It's the simple reason people are working so bloody hard to try and make a decent living at it, and a lot of them can't.
Right. Yeah, we see that a lot here. The failing to address human and economic concerns and trying to paper over that lack of addressing them with surveillance technology and then not working. Like they brought out these electronic logbooks here in America a few years ago, and the crash statistics haven't budged. In fact, they've gone up. And when you present this information to the government, they just say, well, we're not changing it, which tells you it's not about improving anything. It's about control and making it look like they're doing something.
Yes, that's dead right. Yeah.
All right.
Okay,
So
mate.
what's the rest of your day look like? What do you and Francie have cooking?
No, I'm not too sure. Her two daughters are here at the moment, and I think they're about to go. So I'll sign off, mate. Been good talking to you.
Right. No, and Gavin, thank you very much. And once I have all of this organized and published and online, I'll send it to you, and you can send it around to your mates, and I'll make sure Mr. Nigel Frost up there in Tauranga gets to have a listen. And I really appreciate your time, man. Like, you're one of these guys that's just done so much and seen so many things that it behooved me to get it recorded for posterity.
Well, that's very good. Thanks, Gordon. I appreciate the opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
mate. You take care.
Yeah. Happy trails, Gav. Thanks a bunch.
Right. Merry Christmas.
Merry
See ya.
Christmas. Bye.